Hi folks, welcome to another episode of My Life with Robert Burns. Jim Thompson, Douglas Mackenzie here again to talk to another of our cronies from around the Burns world. How are you doing, Jim?
Douglas, I'm harassed today. I can't work technology at all, so I've had a wee bit of night it already. But I'm looking forward to this, I'll tell you tonight.
Good. Well, tonight's guest, folks, is an author and broadcaster. So cronies everywhere, please welcome Billy Kay.
Good to be here.
Nice to see you, Billy. Billy, we always start these podcasts with the same question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Right. I was born in Goston in Ayrshire, 1951, and started up the scheme in Goston and Loudon Avenue. Father worked in Massey Ferguson as a church hand, was the title that he had, a charge hand. Mother never worked in any factory. Mother brought up her family. Two big sisters was spoilt me rotten. And I've continued the same tradition in my own family because I reproduced exactly the same family that my father and mother produced with two lassies and a boy, with the boy being the youngest and spoilt useless by his big sisters and his mammy. But he survived that. And I also give him a love of. Actually, I passed on a lot of different things to my wains. Katrina loves Burns' songs and is a good singer, and loves Scottish music and culture. She studied Scottish literature for a wee while at Edinburgh University. And Ewan, I passed on the love of Fitba, and he actually works for FIFA in Zurich.
Wow.
And the other daughter, the eldest daughter, is a lawyer, and I don't know where she get that for, because she didn't get that for me at all. But I passed on my various loves to my wains. But working class, very much strong working class background. And because of that, Scots-speaking background. Basically, the only time he didn't speak Scots was when he spoke to the teacher or the minister or the doctor, and that wasn't very often. So in the 1950s, in the 10 years before television came in, most of the time spoke Broad Ayrshire Scots. And that was, you inherited that language with your mother's milk, literally. Although my mother she was a miner's daughter, and her father was a pit sinker. So she was born in Breich in Mid Lothian, in the Lothian coalfield, then moved to Mauchline in Ayrshire, to the Ayrshire coalfield, and then they moved through to Bowhill, Cardenden and West Fife, in the Fife coalfield. And that's where she spent most of her childhood, after Mauchline. So she had a few Fife words and Fife expressions that the Ayrshire one. She, like baffies for slippers and bairn for a wain. But so that gave me access to another branch of Scots through my mother. But my father was very, very proud of his Ayrshire background. And he had books like An Ayrshire Night's Entertainment and Burns books and books on local poets. And I recalled some of your Burnsians there. I'll probably have come across a man called Ross Roy in the University of South Carolina. Well, I had a friend in South Carolina, and I visited Columbia in the 1970s. And because I kent a great Burns scholar was there, I decided I would go and chap on his door. And at a very pleasant afternoon with Ross Roy, around about 1972. And he prided himself very much. He was guy vaunty about his Burns collection and his Scottish poetry collection. And I thought, I bet I can catch him out. I says, that's a great collection there, but I bet you haven't get Baker Lee for Goston. Baker Lee was a poet that published around about the turn of the 20th century. And my dad had a book of his poetry. I bet you haven't get Baker Lee for Goston, Ross. And he went straight to the shelf and put down Baker Leaf of Goston
Wow.
in his shelf in Columbia, South Carolina. So I understood then what an amazing collection of poetry the man had. And I understood perfectly when the University of South Carolina bought it for him, and I think it's one of the best Burns collections, one of the best Scottish literature collections in the whole of North America. So that was a wee Burns story far from him.
Aye, brilliant. Before we talk more about Burns, take us back to your schooling. Was it Goston you went to primary school? And
Aye, Goston Primary School. Then there was a slightly bigger Goston Primary School, and then it was the higher grade, as it was called. And you went there until your fourth year, and then you went to Kilmarnock Academy to do your hires. But interestingly, in my book, The Scottish World, there's a photograph of stonemasons at the building, at the beginning of the higher grade school, around about 1908. And my great-grandfather is there, William Kay. And he's sitting with a wee boy at his side, along with the other masons. And he was actually a master mason that built the higher grade school. And he also built the cooperative store buildings in the centre of Goston that are still there today. So I've got a direct connection with that. And all places in Scotland had a problem with being bilingual. They didn't quite grasp the concept of being bilingual and who get it was for Waynes to be able to speak one way, and then it'd be easier for them to speak 2 ways and 3 ways. And that was proven in my own case. So I say in the Mother Tongue book that one of the ironies on Ayrshire Childhood was that you get a prize yearly a year for reciting Burns's poetry, then you get the belt the other 365 days for speaking his language. And, that's a wee bit of an exaggeration, but there's a kernel of truth at the core of that. Looking back, it was ridiculous, the attitude towards the language, and who separated was for the fact that the Burns Federation gave prizes every year for the folk who could speak his language best. Probably the folk that were getting belted most during the year for talking it, because it was akin to sticking your tongue out at the teacher to some folk, which was ludicrous.
And what was it? What did you study at Kilmarnock Academy that led you into a world of literature?
Well, it was because I was bilingual in broad Scots and English for an early age. That gave me, I think, a facility for languages. And when I started studying French and German in secondary school, then I was good at it. And I was a gifted linguist. And for example, I hitchhiked to France and Germany when I was 15, and I could converse away in French and German quite easily. So I had a facility for languages. And at Killie Academy, they even let me ditch mathematics because I was that peer at maths and that good at languages. And I took up Russian at Kilmarnock Academy. So I was strong linguistically. And to tell the truth, I went to university to study modern languages. But at university, I discovered that there was a course in Scots literature. And because my father and mother were readers and went to the library all the time, I was brought up being aware of John Galt and being aware of Douglas Brown, The House of the Green Shutters, the Ochiltree. I was aware of a literary tradition, round about me in Goston, and no just Burns. So when I heard that I could study Scottish literature, I thought, wow, I'd identified with that, because I'd always identified with Scotland, with the language, with the history. I was brought up to respect the history. My father taught me about Wallace and Bruce in Goston and the Irvine Valley, all the stories about them. So I decided I would do Scottish literature. And eventually that led me to ditch my degree in modern languages and switch to a degree in mainly Scottish literature, but it was called an English literature degree. Mm-hmm. And within that, I was able to study American literature, and I was able to study Scots because the language element to it had a strong Scots element. And Jack Aiken, who was one of the great scholars in Scots, taught me. the history of Scots, and therefore, and I did an honours course in Scots. So I managed to study the Scots language for about 3 years at university level, and that gave me a confidence in Scots and about the history of Scots that led to me writing the mother tongue.
So you went straight into writing and broadcasting when you left university, did you?
After a year abroad, I spent a year travelling, right around the world, literally. I left about the 2nd of January, and I come back just in time for Christmas. But I go to Thailand, Malaya, Hawaii, the States, Canada, Mexico, etc., and came home. Actually, on that trip, there's a wee burn story for you. On that trip, me and my pal Bill Campbell for Killie, we flew to Bangkok, and we kept a half bottle of Glenfiddich that we bought on the flight, and we promised ourselves we'd keep it until Burnsnacht. And on the 25th of January, we found ourselves in Penang, in Malaysia.
Yeah.
And at that time, it was before it was built up as a big holiday resort. It was fishermen's huts that they rented out for backpackers, mainly Australians, to stay in. And Bill and I stayed in a fisherman's hut, and we brought in a couple of Australian youngins. And Bill sang Ye Fon Kiss, which was his party piece, and I did Tam O'Shanter, which was my party piece. And we spoke a bit about Burns, and we shared the half bowl, Glenfiddich in Penang. That would be Burnsnacht 1975.
Very good, very good. So, tell us a bit about the broadcasting. My particular interest was when I listened to you on the radio was in Robert Cunningham Graham. I thought your series on Robert Cunningham Graham was fantastic.
Thank you.
And we even encouraged our Burns Club. We have an annual outing, and we go and visit interesting places connected with Burns in Scotland. So we even got to Gartmore, to the wee memorial for Don Roberto.
Great. Oh, what a character! He's the kind of character, if he had been English or American, there would have been series, feature films, done about him. But because the infrastructure in Scotland, and because the semi-colonial state of Scotland at times that gars me grew, then it's only on sporadic occasions you'll have programmes about Don Roberto. But you could literally take every stage of his life and create a series about him. He was that important. And what a man, you know.
Yeah.
What an influence he had on Scotland. So, yeah, but I started life, well, I was a researcher initially in the talks and features department in Edinburgh. And one of the first programmes, one of the first feature I produced on my own was called A Gid Blow. And it was about the brass band movement, heavily featuring my father and my sister, who both played in Gostinborough Band, Gostin Silver Band. So I was brought up with my father in the kitchen and my mother driving my mum doolally with him practicing his euphonium, I think it was, he played. And that was the first documentary I made. And then I told the BBC that there was a big gap in their scheduling, and it was for working class oral history, basically.
Yeah. And
I convinced them to let me do a series, and that was the Odyssey series, which was broadcast, I think it was 3 or 4 series between 1980 and 1984. And and I edited 2 books based on that too, where the oral history was written down, and it ranged across subjects like the history of the Glasgow Irish from Gorbals to Gweedore, the folk in St Kilda who were evacuated in 1936, I think it was, the Dundee jute spinners and weavers, the Bothy lads, the Fern Shields who rocked in the Bothies and Angus, places like that, trying to give an impression of working class life in Scotland in the earlier parts of the 20th century. And it was quite revolutionary for its day, because there wasn't money folk making programs like that. And there wasn't money for broadcasting devices like that, which were mainly, again, speaking Scots. So I was proud of that series.
Are these still available? Because there are sort of things that I certainly would enjoy listening to again.
Some of them are on YouTube, but it's one of these things. It's I can't put them there officially because of contracts. And I mean, in the long term, what I'm hoping, and the National Library are interested, is having them all available in the National Library of Scotland. But what I want to put them there when they can then make them available to listen to. And at the moment, they don't have the capacity on their website to be able to do that. They're interested in principle in having them all there.
Yeah.
But it's, they've got about 12 people working in their archive, and it's put it here. So I'm feared to gee up. I've got copies of all the programmes. But I'm feared to give them all over to the National Library, and then they might disappear in a vault and no appear for a while. But a lot of them are available, and I get requests for them all the time. And if it's folk that have been involved in the programmes, then I try my best to get a copy for them where I can. Yeah.
Okay. What about books? I mean, one of the things we want to talk a wee bit about is your latest book. So maybe you could just give us, our viewers, an idea of the different books that you've written, and then talk a little bit about your current one.
Right. Well, the first thing I published was 12 poems in Scots, in an anthology edited by Robert Garriach, who was writer in residence at Edinburgh University when I was there in the early 1970s. And Robert edited a book called Made in Scotland that included mostly young poets. So me and Liz Lochhead were published in that wee volume. And I think that was the first time Liz had been published as well, around about 1970, maybe 3. And I had a poem called Glen Coe, which won the Grierson Verse Prize at Edinburgh University, and the subject was Glen Coe. And what I did in the poem was contrast the life of a Wayne born in Glen Coe around about the time of the massacre with a Wayne born in Ayrshire around about the time of the Covenanters and the Cullen times in Ayrshire. And because it's out of print, I've put that at the end of my new book too, so it's there for folk to see. So that was the first thing I published. Then I did the Edinburgh Pub Guide. I was the editor of the Edinburgh Pub Guide in about 1977 or 8. Then I did the Odyssey books, early 1980s, Voices from Scotland's Recent Past, and the second collection. And then I think the next one was Knee Deep in Claret, about the history of wine in Scotland and the French connection, in Scots the Mother Tongue, which was published in the mid-1980s and is still in print, I'm pleased to say, after all these years. And The Scottish World, about the diaspora and about the amazing effect of Scottish folk in different parts of the world. And then the latest one, my labour of love, to give something back to the Irvine Valley where I come from, is Born in Kyle, which is my memoir of growing up in Ayrshire in the 1950s and 60s. And as well as some short stories based on the same culture and the same language. It's all written in Scots, and it's stories that I either remember as a wee boy in Goston, or stories that I got for people, and then I've added to. And some of them I've made fictional to change the names of some of the folk involved. But mostly it's a memoir. But I'd like to give a wee extract, if I may, a story for Burns.
Great. Do you want to just put the book up and let
I'll show you.
Audience see the cover?
I'll show you the cover. This is me.
A wee bit to your left, Billy.
Left.
Yeah.
There we are.
There you go.
You see there?
Yeah.
That's an
brilliant.
aerial. That's me as a wee boy, aged 4, at the nursery kill, stoning in an aerial photograph of Gostin and a photograph of me taken just about 5 years ago, something like
There
that.
you go.
And it's of course it's called Born in Kyle because I'm awful proud of the fact that, like Burns, I was a lad that was born in Kyle. So that's what it was called. I mean, if you've got somebody like Burns has done me a wheen of favours actually over the years, because Knee Deep in Claret was also for Burns. For the whistle, Knee Deep in Claret, he diary yield, is a Burns quote, and so is Born in Kyle. But my father was off a pally with actually, before I tell the story, there's a YouTube channel called Indie Matters, and on it, he is a young guy, has put a number of my programs up there. There aren't any of the Odyssey ones, but the Cunningham Graham one is there, I'm pretty sure, and
Good.
so is the Scots tongue, which is the history of the Scottish language.
Yeah.
A 6-part history with an added new one made just a few years ago. And on it is Willie Morrison, who was a great Burns man, who lived in New Mills, was originally from Gostin, like myself. And I got this story from Willie Morrison, but I've made it as part as a fictional account of a character called Willie, who goes away on holiday on one of these early coach tours in the 1960s. And his wife, but do you ken this story?
Willie and I were very close friends for a long time.
Right. Well, you'll probably recognise this story, but other folk maybe be hearing it for the first time. But what happens is, Willie is coming back into Dover after being on a coach tour, and he decides he'll chance it and slip in an extra bottle of whiskey and some extra cartons of cigarettes in the hope that he'll go through the customs hall scot-free. He'll get off with having a wee bit extra prach to take home. But as he's going through the customs hall, the official shouts to him, "Excuse me, sir, I'd like to have a look in your bag." And as Willie puts up the bag onto the trestle table, he's a wee bit worried about what's going to happen. But the official said, "I see from your luggage label, sir, that you're from Ayrshire. Is it Kilmarnock?" Taking in the man's accent, Willie replied, "No, sir, I'm for a wee bit further east." "Oh," said the child, "then you might just ken this," and proceeded to declaim the opening lines of the Rabbie Burns poem, The Holy Fair. "Upon a summer Sunday morn, when nature's face is fair." Willie smiled, said, "Oh, aye," and they both continued in glorious crony unison together. "I'll walk it forth to view the corn and snuff the caller air. The rising sun o'er Gostin Mears with glorious licht was glinting." But then the Hale Customs Hall was at a standstill, and wonder at sick a sifting sound, as the twa lads that, like Burns, were born in Kyle, paid homage to their bard and to their cough country, with its round green hills and vales. The hares were hurpling down the furs, the lavrocks, they were chanting, "Fou sweet that day." Right on cue, on the last line, the customs boy lifted his chalk and put 3 muckle crosses on Willie's bag. "Fou sweet cross, that cross, day cross." He was free to go, his prach was intact, he'd been a total chancer, but he'd get off with it, and life was good. As they headed out to board the bus, Willie said out loud to the English couples for the tour, "Where's your Willie Shakespeare now?" Jenny, his wife, hadn't a clue what he was on about, but she recognised that wee twinkle in her man's eye and longed to see it, though she can't find Will he'd been up to something no quite sleek it, but definitely on the dodgy or debatable side of recht and wrang. So that's the story to Willie Morrison.
Very good, very good. And I can vouch for, having come to your book launch, Billy, I can vouch for the fact that there are many stories in the book of equal enjoyment.
Thank you.
Some great stories there. And my wife at the moment has almost finished it and is ready to hand it over to me. So she's been enjoying reading it as well. So
Great.
So you got us into Burns a wee bit there, and I was, before we were getting there, I was going to get you to talk a wee bit about Robert Ferguson, but I'll pass over to Jim because he's the guy who leads our conversation on Burns, and
Okay.
I'm sure he'll get you talking a wee bit about Jock Thompson's Bairns and the next newcomer at Burns Club to tell us the story of Ferguson.
Okay.
Just listen to that story about Willie Morrison. You know, big, great memories. What a wonderful, wonderful man, and what an advert for Burns.
Aye.
I love the man dearly, and I used to go and see him when he was unfortunately away from home because Jenny just couldn't cope anymore.
Of course. Well, Wally's in that program, The Scots Tongue. His voice is recorded in that series. So if you want to hear Wally's voice, it's on YouTube. Because I interviewed Wally for that, and because he was such a good Scots speaker.
Aye, and I've got some. Jim Gibson took some videos of him as well, and did interview him, and Joe Kennedy did interview
Right.
him, and they're wonderful. I mean, his whole affair was just stunning.
Aye.
It really was.
I was telling Billy before we started that we're going to try and edit some of the Bill Morrison stuff and do it as part of a podcast.
Yeah. However, I take it back to your youth. I mean, you've obviously grown up with Burns.
Yeah.
And what was it like as a child, really, and growing up? You know, just Burns being part of your everyday life.
Well, interestingly, even mainly it was through the singing, I would say, rather than the poetry. The Kais were all good singers. There's a photograph in the book of my dad singing and my mother in rapt attention sitting aside him at a wedding, and all his brothers singing along with him. The Kais were all a family that loved Burns and loved Burns' songs. So that was very much a living tradition. Literally a family get together where you all did a turn. It would be Burns 1 minute and then the Beatles the next minute. It was like that. It was part of popular culture. So I grew up aware of the songs and loving the songs. It's one of the great glories of Scottish culture. But also, for example, my mother had a friend, Mrs. White, who was, I'm sure she wouldn't have been kent in Burns circles because she was just a local buddy who stayed doing the road fairs in Goston. But Mrs. White, when she visited, would say, oh, there would be, her and my mother would be talking, and she would say, oh, Burns had a word for that. And then she would quote screeds of Burns's poetry just off the top of her head. So he was surrounding us, he was part to us, he was part of the culture. And it was always regarded positively, I would say. There was never any question mark against. And I think, looking back on it, in other parts of Scotland, you quite often get folk who look down on their local dialect and look down on Scots and were taught to have a low esteem about the way they spoke. Well, I never got any of that at all in Goston. My father and mother and the extended family never once did they say anything negative about the Scots language. And I think a lot of that was to do with who can you denigrate a language when you ken a world-class poet that's revered around the world wrote in it? Who can you denigrate that language? I think we had maybe more pride, we were more vaunted about he in Scots than a wheen other areas in Scotland, where they didn't have that strength of that cultural background for Burns to support their native language when the pressure was on to change it and to defer to English.
I often say to people, if my father had been alive today, half of them wouldn't be able to understand him.
Yeah.
Ayrshire Scots. I mean, well, Lowland Scots, but he was a come-up man, and he worked all his days in the mines.
Right.
And he spoke, and he used words that just, I mean, you really need to go to the Scots language dictionary to get half of them. But I understand what you're saying. But you're mentioning songs there. What kind of songs were you hearing, and have you got any favourites?
There's that many Burns' songs. One of the ones, there's a chapter in the book called O the Earths, and O the Earths the wind can blow, I dearly like the West. was very much sung like an Ayrshire anthem in our house. So I love that. And I love the lyric. My daughter Katrina sings the lyric beautifully. And I love Ye Fond Kiss. And I also love Westland Winds. I did a program about Dick Gaughan a number of years ago, and we filmed Dick singing Westland Winds, our images of the West of Ireland where his people came from, County Sligo, and it was very, very beautiful. But I could get through, I mean, there's that many Lesser Kent Burns songs. Talking to earlier to Douglas, talking about John Moran, and John's got some beautiful songs on the Burns CDs. That one, Sweetest May, which sounds almost like a classical English pastoral song, but was collected by Burns and went through Burns' horns, and is absolutely exquisitely beautiful. So, and songs like, before I did the Ferguson's Auld Reekie CD and program, I did a Burns thing called I Hae Lude, which was Burns's love songs. And it went through the range of Burns's love songs, for Ye Hae Lee and Rang Lassie, to the classical love songs like Ye Fond Kiss. So the range of Burns has always been astonishing. And we even managed to slip past the BBC censors a couple of wee verses of one of the Bothy, one of the body songs by Burns, Paul Maumi Numajo. So I love the range of Burns. I think he's an astonishing screamer altogether. But on the subject of the language, some of you, the Burnsians, the older Burnsians there, I'll remember a lady called Mrs. Burgoyne, Jane Burgoyne, who was a great Burns scholar. Well, when I was a student studying at Edinburgh University, Mrs. Burgoyne was speaking, I think it must have been in Kilmarnock, and friends of my dad, who were Burnsians, took me down to this lecture. And I think I astonished the company by asking Burgoyne, did she not agree that maybe we spent too much time in Burns, and she'd also include somebody like Robert Ferguson. And the kind of, you could feel the walls cracking and crumbling as I asked this question. But Mrs. Burgoyne thought it was a great question, and because she was a big fan of Ferguson as well. But I remember arguing with the boys who gave me the lift back to Gosson, where I was saying, yes, Scots, use it in public, or, tenter its tint, use it or lose it. And they say, oh, but if I said, steek the yet, nobody would understand us. I said, I would understand you, your pals would understand you, your wains would understand you, and they would repeat it to the next generation. But that mentality was there, that was going to understand if we speak Scots. And it's a difficult mentality to get your head around, but it's to do with, Scotland's relationship with England, Scotland's position in the Union, etc. It's quite political, but we have to go against that if we're to present. Imagine not being able to understand Burns' songs in the future because nobody speaks his language. That'd be a tragedy, but tragedy for humankind.
Yeah, very definitely. You mentioned Ferguson's Auld Reekie there, and I think if you don't mind, could you tell us a wee bit about how that performance came about with Jock Thompson's Bairns? Because certainly some of our club members have got fond memories of that.
Thanks. And thanks to coming at Burns Club and Foley Billy Hasty for organising our visit. Ferguson's Auld Reekie was originally, surprisingly, part of the Odyssey series on Radio Scotland, where I was trying to put on Radio Scotland things that I thought were important to Scotland that had been missed to it. And it was mainly an oral history series, but I managed in the first series, to slip in a couple of cultural programmes. And one was Ferguson's Auld Reekie, where literally I went through Ferguson's poems, and friends of mine, Rod Patterson and Tony Cuff, picked out songs for the same period, and especially for Edinburgh, that would go along with the poems. So with my knowledge of the poetry and their knowledge of the songs, we put together this show, Ferguson's Auld Reekie, and eventually made a CD of it in the early 1980s and performed it at the Edinburgh Folk Club and performed at the Edinburgh Folk Festival for a week, I think it was. But I can't mind exactly when it was. And we toured a few different places, including New Cumnock Burns Club. And we performed in the Lochside House Hotel. And I'm pleased to say I was there about 3 weeks ago at a family wedding. And it's still looking as braw as ever, the landscape round about the hotel.
Oh, very good. No, it was a great night. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It was.
Well, I'm hoping actually I think there's a fair chance that it's going to be revived next year with different musicians, because tragically, two of the original musicians have passed away.
Mhm.
Derek Hoy, who played the fiddle, and Tony Cuff, who is one of the singers. Rod Patterson and Norman Chalmers are still in the go, but Rod isn't singing in public now. He feels as if he doesn't have the strength of the voice that he had.
Aye.
So he doesn't want to give a diminished voice for the public. So it'll mean getting other musicians together. But there's a few Will Kent musicians who are interested, who interestingly grew up listening to the album, the LP, in their mother and father's house, and the CD. And I can't name the names yet, but there's a fairly good chance that it'll be revived, because next year is Ferguson's 250th birthday. And I ken that Rona Brun for New Cumnock is involved in the celebrations, putting things together. And I'm looking at reviving Ferguson's Auld Reekie. I'm young enough just to read the poems. And it'll be in St. Cecilia's Hall in the Cowgate in Edinburgh, right in the heart of the area that Ferguson described. And it's an 18th century salon, St. Cecilia's, and it'll be absolutely perfect in there. And we're hoping to do it the end of November next year.
Oh, fantastic! Keep us posted on that, because
I will.
There's a lot of folk be keen to come and listen and watch that. That'd be tremendous.
But if we do succeed in reviving it, then hopefully we'll do it in one or two other places as well.
Yeah, good.
The thing about Ferguson is I think he gets kind of forgotten, and I plead guilty to that as well, because I read his poems and I really didn't take to them so well when I was younger. And then I happened to have to review Rona's book on Ferguson, and it was just like somebody switching a light on.
Aye.
And I would recommend it to folk if you're not familiar with Ferguson. You can get out the library even and read the thing. And it sent me back to reading all these poems again with a level of understanding that just changed entirely what I was reading, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
Cool stuff. Wonderful. They should get more, I think, airtime.
Billy, I know you honoured us with coming to New Cumnock Burns Club and speaking at one of our suppers. Do you do very much of that? Do you speak at many Burns clubs?
When I'm invited, I try and go, but usually because of sometimes the distance involved, I stay in Northeast Fife. So, and I don't have a house anymore, a family house in Ayrshire to stay at. So that's the problem, distance and time, and therefore I usually have to stay overnight when I stay in places. But I try and do things, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I try and but to tell you the truth, there was a wee period where I got a wee bit cynical, because some of the big burn suppers, a couple of burn suppers that I went to, where I did do the immortal memory, it struck me that the folk weren't there for Burns, they were there for a couple of comedians who did their usual repertoire, and it was full of swearing and effing, and it was funny, but it had hee-haw to do with Burns. And because I'm an Ayrshireman and of a prude, I'm an Ayrshire background, I take Burns seriously, and I think he should be taken seriously. I mean, he should be presented seriously. Within Burns, there's humour and there's love and there's tragedy. There's all life is in Burns. But I don't think he should be turned into a vehicle for comedians, basically.
No, I think you get a lot of agreement with you on that, especially at Newcomer Burns Club.
Aye,
Well, I say, I mean, it's the I mentioned Newcomer Burns Club in the book because I've had the honour of speaking about Burns in the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And it was as big an honour for me to address the Newcomer Burns Club as it was to speak at the Burns conference in 2009, I think it was, in Washington, D.C., because you're the heartland. In other words, in Burnsian terms, New Cumnock and Cumnock in that South Ayrshire area for the spoken language is one of the heartlands of spoken Scots today. So to be invited to address Burnsians in a place like New Cumnock Burns Club was a great honour to me.
Excellent.
You mentioned something, I want to take you back a wee bit as well. You mentioned something earlier on about having a wee kind of burn supper, if you like, in Thailand.
Yeah.
And you were talking about Tam O'Shanter. Is that your favourite poem, or is there another one?
Well, I love Tam because of the Burns Federation. I learned wee bits of it as a weighing for the Burns competition. And suddenly, eureka, I just about had it. I had it. And then I realised I could string it together and it could become my part piece. So I love reciting Tam. I think it's got a verve to it and a rhythm to it. The only thing that's like it, in a way, with the rhythm of the horse and everything, there's a great poem by Goethe, the German poet, called Errol König, the Errol King. And it's got the rhythm of the horse. It's a tragic, eerie, eldritch story, a bit like Tam O'Shanter too. And it's the only poem I can think of. It begins, "Wer reitet so spät durch Nacht und Wind, es ist der Vater mit seinem Kind. Fasst den Knaben wohl in dem Arm, fasst ihn sicher, hält ihn warm." You can hear the horse galloping, as you can with Tam and Tam O'Shanter. So I love Tam O'Shanter, but the other poems that I love the epistle to his brother poet Davy. In fact, I was quoting that the day because I'm writing a preface for another great Burnsian in Portugal, Carlos, who's written a book of poems based on Scotland and his experiences of Scotland. And I was remembering the fact that Burns says, "Nae treasures nor pleasures can make us happy lang. The heart eyes the paired eye that makes us rechter rang." And I was quoting for that poem, and I went back and double checked the lines. So that's another one, the epistle to brother Davy. But there's that again. There's that money, and I had the good fortune to be able to study him under folk like Ian Campbell and Ronnie Jack at Edinburgh University in the early 1970s. And I also had the good fortune of listening and going to the School of Scottish Studies then, and going to the lectures by, there's another wee story I can tell you, by Hamish Henderson, the great folklorist and poet and songwriter. Hamish wrote "Freedom Come All Ye," for example. It became the anthem of the independence movement and the Yes movement. Well, when I was a student at Edinburgh in the early 1970s, I used to sit in on Hamish's lectures, and he would lecture on Scots song. And he was brilliant. He was a brilliant lecturer. He spoke fluent German and Italian and one or two other languages, and he would bring in examples for other cultures and other poets to illuminate his lectures on Burns or Ramsay. And during one, it was the days of the old reel-to-reel tape recorders, and he had his lecture planned and illustrated it with, for example, the singing of Jean Redpath or Jeannie Robertson or people like that. And in this packed lecture hall in the School of Scottish Studies this afternoon, he was lecturing on the songs of Burns. And he got to a bit where he had got the extracts mixed up, and he realised he was going to have to listen on headphones to find the correct extract that he wanted to play next. So what he did was he turned to the audience and said, literally, I was going to let you hear Gene Redpath singing a Burns song, but instead of that, we've got a man straight from the Burns country in Ayrshire sitting at the back of the hall. Billy, would you give us a Burns song, please? And that my mouth just dropped open because I had no warning of this. Fortunately, I ken off by heart the shortest Burns song that you can do as quick as owning, which is Rattlin' Roaring Willie, and he held to the fair for to sell his fiddle and buy some other wear, and Pearton wi' his fiddle the sought tier blintiesy, Rattlin' Roaring Willie, you're welcome here to me. So I sung Rattlin' Roaring Willie, and it took about maybe 12 minutes, the 3 or 4 verses, and by that time Hamish had got his tape recorder fixed, and then he can proceed with his lecture. The other Hamish Henderson story with Burns was the first time I ever performed Tam O'Shanter outside Ayrshire was when in my first year at Edinburgh, when the Folk Song Society had a Burns supper, a Burns night, and Hamish Henderson was the Ferrantai, was the compere. And I said I would do Tam O'Shanter for him. And I was nervous because it was the first time I'd done one in public in Edinburgh. So I was nervous, and I did it too fast. And I started doing it anyway to applause. And Hamish said to the audience, Billy, if Meg had run as fast as you recited that poem, she would still have her tail.
Oh, very good.
Another Hamish Henderson story, because nobody will probably ken it. But Sheena Wellington, the great traditional singer, who's a man's a man for all that, of course, opened the Scottish Parliament building. Sheena's a pal of mine. And she tells the story of going to a folk festival and and her and Hamish and a number of people were staying in the same bed and breakfast. And she come home for the concert, whatever, quite late on, maybe about 1 a.m. They kind of staggered home for wherever they were. And the landlord at this bed and breakfast where they were staying had 2 dogs. And she walked in, and there was Hamish Henderson reciting the 2 dogs to the 2 dogs sitting there like sitting there like that and tucking it all in. So that's a wee another Hamish Henderson story for you.
Very good. Billy, we're coming to the end of our podcast time, but I wonder if you could give us another of your stories from the book.
Okay. Well, this is the opening of the chapter called Hame. And it's there to the memoir section where I'm looking back in Goston in the early 1950s and about the sense of belonging that folk had and the responsibilities that sense of belonging had, even for wee wains like me going to a game of football. Hame. East is east, west is west, but Hame's best. Looking back to Goston in the 1950s, what comes into my mind more than aught else is the sense of belonging to a community. That in itself brought comfort because you were happy in the warmth of an extended family. But it come with responsibilities too. You could be blithely heading down the road for a game of football at the public park when an old buddy, only old buddy, could cry out to you and say, "Come here, son, would you run a message for me? I walk down to the bottom store and get me half a pan of ham for my man's tea. Here's half a croon. And I've written down my store number in case you can't mind it." There was no way you could refuse an old buddy. So you had to trochel away down to the shop and back while your pals get torn into one another at the football. Now, you invariably got a wee reward or a threepenny bit or some sweets. But what sticks in my head now is the communal nature of it. Only old woman could commandeer only Wayne going by their windy to run a message for them. It was just the din thing. So that's a wee extract for the opening there.
Very good. Jim, anything we want to ask Billy before we close?
No, memories are just running through my head now as a boy and walking like at my granny's, and you know, and then Cumnock and then Mauchline,
Aye.
where my father was at Sorn, and I could just see that happening.
Of course. And there's a lot of mining stories in there too, boys, where short stories that I picked up. There's one called Miracle in Man's Close, which is a piece of oral history that I created a short story out of. And it's based on a true story. Man's Close was this part of Goshen where it was a bit like a miner's row. And during the 26th strike, a neighbour of the case in Man's Close went to visit a working brother in Glasgow. And the working brother worked in the shipyards. They had a young family and times were hard for him. And the mother said, don't take any money for the boy if he offers it to you. And when he went to Glasgow, he visited his brother, refused 10 shilling notes the brother wanted to push into his jacket pocket. And it wasn't until he was on the road back to Goshen, he realised the brother had managed to slip the 10 shilling notes into his inside pocket. He thought, my God. He got to Goshen, and instead of keeping the 10 shilling notes for the McSkimmons, the family that the boy belonged to, what he did was he went into Banna's, the fish and chip shop in Goshen, and bought 30 fish suppers, one for every man, woman, and wean in the Man's Close. And I describe it as, it's like the miracle of the fishes, the feeding of the masses. But that's a true story for the time of the general strike, when no matter who poverty-stricken they were, rather than keep it to themselves, they shared it among the miners of Man's Close. So these are stories that have to be preserved, and that's me giving the love that I got for my community. I'm giving back in this book.
Excellent. Well, Billy, when we introduced you as an author and broadcaster, but I think we should have added raconteur to that, because some of your stories have been tremendous.
Good.
And I really just want to thank you for spending time with us. Can I just tell our viewers that we'll attach some images of some of Billy's books towards the end, in case you want to look them up and find a source for these books. But in the meantime, Billy, just to say thank you very much for telling us all about your life with Robert Burns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, boys. Cheers.
Cheers.